So when a family gets a fixer-upper, they get more than bargained for. That's basically the story of the Amityville Horror, made in 1979, was the original, and then remade in 2005. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
So one of the things I thought was interesting as a question is how do movies like kind of shape our reality? Like, in other words, sometimes it seems like this is kind of thing where, you know, art imitates life and life imitates art and stuff.
Yes, I mean, in this one, it's the case of, this is almost like some enterprising people who've capitalized on the fear of other people. They're quite ahead of their game, I think. I think the Lutzes, if that was the people who did actually move in after the DeFreos, the people who originally lived in the house.
DeFeos, yeah.
Yeah, I think they were, they were doing a kind of almost, I wouldn't say HGTV, almost, ghost story before their time. But you can call them con artists if you want to. But I thought it was quite impressive. But I mean, it obviously was a phenomenon at the time. A lot of people felt Amityville Horror was an actual real thing. So perhaps we should explain that if anyone is unfamiliar with the story of the Amityville Horror, that there was a family called the DeFeos, if I'll get that wrong, but basically a real life crime of the father went basically insane and killed his. It was the son, was it?
Yeah,
I thought it was the father.
Yeah, it was actually the son that killed both parents and then the other siblings and stuff.
Right. Okay. And then went to a bar and then got caught, and that was that. Yeah. And then that the story should sort of end there if it was one of these kind of documentaries on true life crime. But no, another family moves in, and they start to experience what they describe as strange phenomena in the house. These spirits coming back to haunt them from within the house.
Yeah, and in the first film, we have actually James Brolin and Margot Kidder as the young couple and stuff. They move in with her family and stuff because apparently and that's the thing I don't think was necessarily clear. There's something about like kind of the father kind of somehow something happened with them. I suspect it was kind of like an addiction or something like that, but it's not really. I don't think it's really said directly why the the original dad of the kids kind of is out of the picture and stuff. And then like all this stuff kind of starts happening and everything. And I think for me, one of the things that was interesting was this idea of here's a couple that's trying to start a new family together and stuff. And then, like kind of all this kind of crazy stuff starts happening and everything. And I feel like one of the fears that, we have is that like, when a home is supposed to be this kind of place of safety, right, and stuff, that a family turning on itself is probably like one of the most horrible things that can happen and everything.
Yeah, no, I think that's what's sort of clever about the story. I should also probably mention there was a book written in 1977, which it was based on.
Right.
And the same year, The Shining was also written as well, but we'll get into that later on. But right. I mean, I think that's what's sort of so effective. This is almost like one of the original, maybe not the original haunted house house stories, but certainly an early one. And there's definitely something, as we've seen in things like The Grudge, various other movies that are sort of haunted house ones. There's something very kind of disconcerting about setting a horror movie in a house because it is this place of safety. But it's also, I think what's so effective about them is that there are lots of times when you're in your own house, when you're actually alone, funnily enough. So there's often times where you you pause and reflect on various things like your life and things like this, because you will be alone in the bathroom, or you'll be alone sort of, doing something in a room, or in the basement, or in the loft, and all these kind of things. So funnily enough, even though we spend a lot of our time at home, and probably even with families, there's still a good portion that you'd actually spend by yourself. So it's quite easy to get into that kind of slightly kind of reflective, introspective kind of mode of thought. So I think it's why they're so good in subject matter.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point though. That like even though you're, like you said, with your family and stuff, it is those kind of moments that like you're by yourself where like kind of you're alone with your thoughts, and kind of like where like kind of things can really work themselves up and everything like that. Where I think what it kind of heightens sometimes is the family dramas and stuff. Like kind of like what is he really thinking, and then what's going on with him and stuff like that. And we actually, it's interesting how the movie actually captures certain moments like that, and then it seems like I mean that at a certain point that George Lutz, kind of this guy, the husband, was going to actually turn on the family, and do a repeat of kind of what happened with the DeFeos and stuff. And I think that was the thing that really struck me, was that like you really captured that with like kind of those moments when like he kind of looks really deranged, and something that like people even though that like in the story major spoilers always that he's supposed to look like Ron LaFeo, the son who killed the whole family and stuff like that. It actually also reminds me of Charles Manson, where like like kind of, as we know, like this was only a few years before that was like kind of really captured the nation's imagination. That's kind of like again, a horrible killing in the home and stuff like that. And it just kind of like really there's echoes of that, not only in the Feo kind of slayings and stuff, but also just even like kind of what we see, like kind of George Lutz kind of slowly turning into like over time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, there's the psychological element of the family in these movies is the most interesting part, because a lot of people will have almost like a separate persona when they're at home compared to when they're out. A lot of people will be, and so this is almost like an exaggeration of this. Almost like there's this totally in love, just got married, happy couple who seem very idyllic, who then kind of are turning on themselves in a matter of weeks. But it's this difference of how they treat each other compared to the outside world, and how that environment sort of shapes them. But I mean, I would also say this movie is kind of, in a way, I kind of feel it's like a male, almost not really coming of age, but sort of coming of manhood movie. Because what you've got is, if you look at like the father, he's someone who he's basically taking on a lot of responsibility.
Right.
He's taking on the kids of another sort of marriage. He's taking on a new house. He's got to try and balance this with a job, and he's trying to sort of
his business too. It's not just his job.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I mean, he's got his own business. So for me, it's almost like a sort of a parable for like the responsibilities that we take on, and how they can make you, how they can put stress on you and distort your natural behavior, really, I think.
It's funny you say that too, because there's this kind of worn knob that he's kind of like is going up the stairs, and that totally echoed like It's a Wonderful Life for me, and right. so I had this kind of bizarre idea that like what if like George and Mary Bailey had moved into the Amityville house and stuff, like kind of, I mean, that totally would change that story, and but he certainly would have like like instead of ghosts of like kind of memories, whatever stuff, it's kind of course a different sort of Christmas visit, I guess.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's funny, both about home ownership in different ways. But I mean, one is like this sort of one that's in constant state of disrepair, and It's a Wonderful Life, right? But becomes a kind of a project,
charming kind of,
it kind of brings the family together, because whereas this one is obviously it's slightly different type of fixer-upper, right. But it's kind of, I guess it's this kind of also allure of something that's too good to be true. This massive house that's right on the water and is underpriced, and it's.
I tell you, like these movies really bring out like the horrors of real estate. Kind of whether it's like a mortgage going after you, or in this case it's evil spirits and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of just like a supernatural version of HGTV, really. It's every room's got something wrong in it.
Right.
And it's not that it's not up to code. It's just that it's got a swarm of flies and a demonic pig in it in this case. But similar kind of thing, I think, somewhere. Similar psychological roots.
And so that's another element too, because even The Exorcist had just come out before this as well. So it's like it has this all, like you had like kind of massive kind of slayings and stuff. You had this kind of haunted kind of house or whatever like that, and then you even had like this attempt by an exorcism by in this case it's Father Delaney played by Rod Steiger, and like so it's like kind of had all these kind of elements and stuff like that. So I feel like okay, yeah, maybe it's based on a true story or whatever, but there's certainly a kind of a almost like a mix, right, of like different stories that's kind of captured here that like you can definitely see why like it really captured people's imagination stuff.
Yeah, and it was a huge box office hit. I think that's what we have to remember. Going back, it may not seem like the most scary movie, but it was creepy. I mean, I remember watching it in the early 80s, probably when I was too young, and it kind of creeped me out.
Yeah.
Now when you're watching it in high definition, the red eyes that the wife sees through the window, they look obviously just like a couple of lights. Whereas if you were watching that back on like, standard definition back in the 80s, you couldn't really tell what they were. It had a much more kind of mysterious kind of element to it. But I mean, it's kind of, I think what's clever about it is that there isn't really much that actually happens in the movie.
Right.
It's done mostly with atmosphere and really kind of piggybacks on the fact that this was a book that was supposedly about a true story. So, the thing that the experience of the priest is, okay, he's kind of got flies around him, but it just seems to be his own experience. There's nothing attacking him or anything. It's just him having this kind of crisis inside the house. Yeah. Likewise, when the nun comes and visits, again, it's her own internal kind of feelings that produce the effects that the house does. And likewise, when the babysitter's trapped in the closet, nothing really happens to her. She's just she's just overcome with like a sort of supernatural fear, basically. So a lot of it is, it's not given very good ratings, but I think some of the performances, the fact that they just have to produce these really intense feelings out of more or less nothing, except for a few flies or being trapped in a closet, they really bring so much intensity to their fear. Right. It's almost kind of like watching a sort of drama class or something with people trying to just go a bit over the top. And I mean, for me, one of my favorite performances is it's the business associate's wife, who's kind of into psychic phenomena.
Right.
And I mean, when they discover the room at the basement, she's really intense in that scene. So yeah, I mean, it's underrated, I think, as far as a horror movie goes. I think it's some pretty intense stuff there, and it's very tense and creepy. There's not a lot of jump scares. It's all kind of just like, building tension, really.
Yeah, it's funny how what it also reminds me of is that they would do these days, but rather than counting down, of course, they're just counting to like this, like if you know the story, then you know that like they only lasted there in 28 days, and so unlike The Grudge, where it's kind of like we're counting down from 7 days and stuff, but we're really conscious of kind of time, and I feel like that actually adds a certain element to it, just like kind of where this the sense of like things are happening over time and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's one of the few ones where you get that kind of timeline and counting down, which, I mean, I think it was obviously a big hit with some of the Japanese horror directors, because we saw that also in The Ring, and I think the Grudge doesn't use it in terms of days.
Oh, sorry, yeah, The Ring, yeah.
It denotes it in terms of the characters and their place in the timeline.
Right.
But it's a very clear kind of echo back to the Amityville Horror, I thought, from watching those Japanese horror movies.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, for me as well, the arc of the father is really interesting. I think James Brolin does a really good job of being very affable and likable at the beginning and becoming menacing, not through doing anything overly extravagant or violent, or there's not sort of an anger-based thing. I think what's effective is that he withdraws more and more, and becomes more and more introspective, and is almost not even speaking by the end, and is just chopping away at the axe. That's a far more kind of effective portrayal of someone who's kind of losing it, rather than, well, what we will see in the remake. But yeah, I thought he did a really good job, and Margot Kidder is, you know, she just does hysterical really well. So
yeah, and she had just come off of you know, her breakout role in you know, Superman and stuff like that. So people kind of, you know, I think really at this point in like kind of the movie going audience, she was really somebody people root for and stuff like that. So to see her like being really caught in the situation that like is traumatizing and stuff like that, you know, I think it wasn't too hard for people to kind of sympathize with her and kind of like really kind of hope that like, you know, the George Lutz character is not going to go nuts and, you know, kind of slaughter her and the family and stuff.
But I thought what was clever was that you didn't really, you know, they played it a very fine line of, you know, is he actually going mad, or is he just kind of a bit bored, depressed or something? Because he's so withdrawn, you just don't know that he just seems a bit grumpy rather than someone who's going to go out and kill you. But they do a very fine line of like, you know, he's just kind of quiet, but just keeps picking up the axe and going for it. And
it is kind of like just almost like just hinted at, rather than like kind of, you know, and as we'll see in the remake and stuff like that, where it's a little bit more like kind of overt and in your face and stuff. I
think a little is an understatement, but yeah. And likewise, it's kind of they introduced the priest much earlier, and that's kind of a bit of a weird side story, because nothing ever really. You kind of expect, a bit like The Exorcist, the priest to kind of rock up and save the day, but it's quite an odd turn. There's just endless phone calls that go unanswered, which is a bit of a strange one.
Right.
And I don't know if that was something that was in the book, but it kind of, for me, it echoed back to The Omen, in there is this supernatural force located around a place or thing, but if you try and challenge it in any way, it can reach out of its normal sort of terror zone and affect kind of cars and people going through elevators and things like this. So there was very much that kind of thing there with the priest and with his car crashing and various other things, getting sick and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff really kind of made you like wonder, like, you know, what the heck is really going on and stuff like that. Because like a lot of the things kind of around the house itself made it seem like, okay, you know, like the house is possessed and all that kind of stuff. But then, you know, once you had that element though, like kind of where, you know, like you said, the priest is trying to just drive down the road to the house and stuff, and the car is kind of, you know, flipping out literally and everything. It's like kind of, and the other thing too is it's broad daylight, because everything else is like kind of happening at night and around the whole 3:15 thing and stuff. Speaking of which, I kind of kept wondering, and I kept kind of hoping that they were going to, you know, besides like that being kind of the, you know, the hour of you know, like kind of the fatal slaying of the family, stuff like that, in the Fail family. I kept wondering, what was it about 3:15? Like, were they going to at some point reveal that and everything like that? And you know, I don't know. Like, apparently, some people say that like it's supposedly like a witching hour of like kind of where the gates of hell are open or something like that. But I mean, I just, you know, I was kind of curious, like why, like kind of what was it, you know, like, or you would think that maybe like it was when like kind of you know, something else kind of happened, you know, like at 3:15 that kind of from the original spirits of the home or something, like, I don't know, like it seemed like they were finally going to ask that question at some point, but it never seemed to happen.
yeah there wasn't really much there, aside from the fact that it was, you know, when the original killings took place. There wasn't, you know, you were wondering if there was some other significance, but I suppose again that's kind of more a testament to them just following the book, I think, more than trying to come up with, you know, a world building kind of thing from it. And I mean, so as it sort of turns out, and again, more spoilers, you know, this supposedly was a sort of Salem witch area, house of someone who is a witch that originally this house was built on, where they discover this hidden room. And this kind of leads me on to, well, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but
Well, there was also apparently I was watching like kind of briefly the documentary about like kind of the story behind the whole Amityville Horror, the actual kind of story and stuff, and you know. One of the things again was like kind of rumored was like, you know, that there was some kind of dead Indian burial ground, like kind of, you know, it's like it seems like it has all these elements, like kind of, you know, it's like, you know, is there anything else that like, you know, from a horror genre that they can throw in, like, you know, I mean, they have, you know, of course the potential of an axe murderer, and then the, you know, it's like kind of I don't think they could squeeze in any more, you know, horror stories into this one house.
Well, I mean, speaking of which, okay, so we have to get onto, for me, which is the most interesting thing about this movie, really. And that is the fact that the book came out in 1977, same year that The Shining was written.
Right.
The Shining then took the best part of 3 years in production to be made, with various bits that got changed. Stephen King wrote a screenplay for it that Kubrick dismissed. In the meantime, you've got this movie being made on a 2-year timeline that comes out in 1979.
Right.
Now, when you actually objectively look at the similarities, you can't help feeling that basically The Shining is a ripoff of the Amityville Horror. Because you've got two places built on old Indian burial grounds where the spirits of the dead are kind of coming up and making people do kill their families on a repetitive cycle, like it happens to one family, and then who's the groundskeeper in The Shining, and it's the DeFreos in this one, and then it comes, and the threat is that you've got the father kind of losing his mind and doing the same thing to his family. You've got, again, a kind of I suppose the difference, the pressure with the Amityville Horror is that it's a father trying to deal with a new family, whereas with in The Shining, he's kind of got to deal with, you know, some kind of book writing thing, which I think Stephen King just made it more autobiographical there. But so you've got that. The other thing for me is like they discover a room at the bottom of the house that is the red room, and what is it that, you know, little Danny says it's red rum. I mean, how much closer can you get? They both the kids have an imaginary friend that they talk to that tells them about the secret history of what's going on, and tries to sort of, and you can't quite tell if it's like a goody, you know, a good spirit or a bad spirit, but generally it's supposed to be good. Both you got two axe-wielding dads who are slowly losing their minds and attacking their families within the confines of what's supposed to be it's kind of a safe place. There's a lot of similarities there, really. Yeah,
especially when you kind of look at it that way, that they're like kind of drawing the comparison, like kind of really like kind of there's more than like kind of coincidence, I think.
I think what the most striking difference would be that you can clearly see the transition from the father in the Amityville Horror from going from nice guy to withdrawn psychopath, whereas in The Shining he seems pretty unhinged from the word go, which is different from the book. The book is much closer to the Amityville Horror in that respect.
Okay,
but and I think that's kind of, again though, that for me is just like you're taking a guy who's not particularly happy with this scenario and the responsibilities being laid on him, confine him and put pressure on him, and he'll break, is basically the message. I think that's perhaps of both movies, really.
Yeah, we'll definitely, you know, kind of that's an upcoming discussion. We're going to have to look more deeply, and it'll be interesting, kind of, you know, after we do that, or maybe even during that, we'll kind of reflect on like kind of, you know, these different things that are, like you said, such, you know, kind of strange kind of, you know, parallels and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it could just be one of those things where it wasn't really very conscious and it was purely coincidental, because you do see very strange coincidences of time, all sorts of things, like very similar things were invented at various points in time by two separate people on different sides of the planet. It's just a number of, you know, factors that all come into something. But yeah, anyway, we'll cover that in Shining, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of what happened with, you know, The Walking Dead / the original 28 Days.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that where like, you know, that, I mean, both, you know, kind of creators, you know, swear up and down that there was no like kind of, you know, what's called ripping off of each other, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, one thing I will say is both The Shining and the Amityville Horror both have really, really cool soundtracks. And getting back to just the Amityville Horror, the Lalo Schifrin soundtrack in this, it's one of those things that when you first start watching the movie, you think, well, you know, he's done much better stuff. You know, he's done like Bullet, and you think, this is a bit kind of wishy-washy, just some spooky kind of choir. By the end of the movie, it's like that soundtrack is like really, it's pretty haunting. Yeah, you're kind of like, I don't ever want to hear children singing again after this movie. So it's really effective. It's really effective. I had like, you know, children's choir going, pulsing in and out like it does in the movie through my head for a few days. And I have to admit, I was quite creeped out because I watched Amityville when it came out, and I was really quite young when it came out. Yeah. And I can't help but just get slightly creeped out by Amityville. It's between this and The Exorcist, those are kind of two movies that, you know, you should never watch as a kid and stuff. No. Funnily enough, I mean, like The Exorcist didn't really scare me very much. Oh, interesting. No, I thought it was all a bit silly and a bit over the top, but Amityville is quite subtle, really. Did you watch it like kind of roughly the same kind of age, or? No, I think no. I watched probably Exorcist a couple of years later. That was probably why. Yeah, that's probably why Amityville just hit me when I was earlier, and that's why Nightmare on Elm Street kind of freaks me out as well, because I just watched that when I was too young as well. But, yeah. Yeah, I guess it almost feels like a public service announcement here that you know, kind of parents mind what your kids are watching at which age and stuff. I know. Yes. So I guess speaking of bad parenting, I guess it's time to get on to the remake of Amityville Horror with Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, and I kind of feel like his beard and physique kind of steal the show here. I was going to say that, like, you know, we see lots of shirtless Ryan Reynolds in this remake and stuff. I mean, it's almost gratuitous in terms of you know, the plenty of time. I mean, in different times, you swear he's like kind of just basically like, that's right, you know, I had a pretty intense you know, workout. Yeah, this axe workout. It should be like, you know, the Amityville axe workout for it's like the COVID, you know, workout, just chopping wood and getting in shape at home. And so again, like kind of here we have again the what we call the MTV effect, because, you know, like kind of along with, you know, him is, you know, Melissa George, who like I swear, like, you know, she looks like Olivia D'Abo from the Wonder Years and stuff, the sister of you know, kind of Arnold, but you know it. And it's funny because I happened to look it up that, like, you know, she you know, knows that she gets confused different times and stuff, and you know, so it's not, you know, it's not just something that, you know, I thought it's like it's recognized by other people, that people kind of go, you know, like, isn't she the one from the Wonder Years and stuff? And no, she's not, stuff. So no, I mean, and the babysitter is considerably more attractive. She doesn't have that unfortunate retainer that she does in the original. Right. But yeah, I mean, in this movie, we've replaced all kind of creepy tension building with a constant need to try and provide jump scares every 5 or 10 minutes in the movie. There's so little there's like very little tension, and like I lost count of the number of times Ryan Reynolds' face just kind of appeared in frame with some sort of stab of music, like it's Ryan Reynolds, and that we're so supposed to be scared by that. And they try to kind of, it's obviously nothing like the book in that they try and amp up everything, rather than just having a little girl that creepily has a friend. Now she's balancing on the very top beam of the house, and I'll tell you that was for me actually one of the most horrifying moments. Actually, was, you know, seeing Chloe, you know, Grace Moretz kind of up, you know, as this little kid, and I don't know how they shot it, but like, you know, I'm sure they kind of had some kind of wires and all kind of stuff, but you know, that to me was like actually one of the most horrifying moments, actually. And this is one of the things, you know, I mean, so of course we are in the Chloe Grace Moretz season of our show.
Yes.
So, you know, this is probably one of the first movies she did, I'm guessing, because she looks really young in this.
Yeah,
and,
she's a teeny kid.
She's like a real tiny kid. And, you know, they, and they put her in some pretty confrontational kind of acting scenes where she's shouting at her parents and shouting back at her.
Yeah,
they've got her like balancing on top of the house. Yeah, she's pretty. You can already tell she's obviously both her and I presume her very confident parents are okay with all of this. So yeah, you know, this is a very good performance for her, I think, given her age and everything else.
I swear, like, you know, if you ask, like, kind of, you know, other than the kind of the leads and stuff like that, who you remember from the movie, right, and stuff, it's her, like, kind of, you know, like, even that you know, kind of, like, you can see, like, kind of the other kids are kind of like generic kind of, you know, boys and stuff like that. But, you know, and I guess what's funny to me is that, like, what is it about, like, kind of, you know, an actor, right, that kind of something about them that, like, you know, because she doesn't, you know, like, she's cute and stuff like that, but she's not like extraordinary cute, whatever, and she's never been, you know, even as you know, like, kind of more of an adult actor or something like that, she's attractive but not like stunning and everything. But there's something about her performances that really, like, think is kind of just striking and stuff. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what is it like we can even start seeing now at this point, do you think?
I feel very sorry for the kids in this movie after you just described them. You know, you're just like, well, those kids are just generic, and she's cute, but not that, you know, attractive. No. Yeah, I know. There's definitely, I mean, I would say of all the performances, hers is one of the best. Ryan Reynolds seems to be completely overacting his way through the entire movie and isn't particularly convincing as a psychopath, in my opinion, anyway. The wife does a pretty decent job.
Yeah, I thought so too, yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, she's just very committed to the role, I think. Yeah, Chloe Moretz, and yeah, she does a great job. She's very believable.
I feel like she's, you know, when you watch her in those moments, like you said, when she's confronted by the parents, she's not just reading lines though. She's really kind of present and, like, you know, like, I think she like kind of just engages with, like, kind of, you know, and she's not just shouting, like, kind of, you know, like, you know, she's like really believing that, like, you know, there's this, you know, girl called Jody that, like, kind of, you know, like I feel like, you know, she's committed to kind of, like you said, to just, like, kind of that belief. And you swear that, like, you know, here's this little girl who really believes that this spirit girl is kind of talking to her or something like that. And I feel like that's what I'm watching, and not so much like, you know, somebody who's like just like playing a kid or a kid that's playing, you know, a girl that believes that and stuff like that.
Yeah. I actually thought the little boy, well, he's the older of the two boys, did a great job as well. He was very good at being, and they have this, that's the one theme actually they have in this that they don't really, that they emphasize more, this idea of, like, the father bullying their sons and sort of having these sort of expectations of toughness and things like this was something they kind of brought into this one. He did a very good job, I think, in terms of a performance as well. So
you talk about the boy that, like, he's sitting there, like, holding the wood as Ryan Reynolds is shouting it. Yeah, I have to admit that was a pretty striking performance. I was, like, scared for him too, like, in that moment.
Yeah, and just the scene with him and the babysitter and things like this. There was some quite nice touches, you know. Yeah, I mean, in this, the babysitter's considerably unrealistically wanting to sort of French kiss a kid who's like.
We got to talk about the babysitter. That was, like, kind of really, like, kind of, what the hell was that? Like, kind of, I mean, that's a huge kind of difference between, you know, like, you know, because the original kind of has a fairly regular babysitter that kind of, you know, goes off to the deep end when, like, she's trapped in the closet stuff. But this one is kind of this bizarro kind of.
Well, this is this sort of postmodern cynicism of, like, you know, people aren't going to pay attention to a film unless there's somebody attractive on the screen every 15 minutes. That was kind of very much a kind of a late 90s, early 2000s thing. Like, every movie had to have someone sort of, like, blatantly attractive, half in a state of undress to make sure people didn't get bored and look at their mobile phones or something like this. So, you know, they've just kind of thrown that in there. Which just kind of, for me, it just kind of really brings you out of the whole movie. It makes it more into, I mean, we're in post-screen territory here, so it's okay in one of those movies because it's all kind of part of the whole meta subject matter of the film. In this, it just kind of detracts from any kind of tension, in the movie. And of course, all of the occurrences, the phenomena of the house are all being kind of amped up to 11, like rather than the original with the priest sort of slowly kind of going out of his mind with these flies buzzing around him. This time he's looking up at an air conditioning vent or something and explodes with flies in his face, which I just thought was, and he's there screaming because the flies have exploded. I mean, it just sounds so stupid describing it, but that's what happens.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember many bleeding walls though. Maybe I just got bored by that point in the movie. Was there
There's like a trickle.
Walls?
I guess it's funny how I think that's one thing that they really did amp up in the original, right? Like kind of wasn't it like kind of like where like everything is kind of gushing, like almost like kind of with blood at a certain point.
Yeah, towards the end there are stairs, and that again. Sorry, I missed this earlier in my comparison with The Shining.
Okay,
there is no mention in the book of The Shining of the elevators opening and blood pouring. So for me, that's a very clear idea that was stolen from Amityville and reworked. But anyway, again, another time. I mean, they have, in this one, you got Ryan Reynolds as the father, who's now kind of like, again, we're in the territory of it's all the parents' fault in terms of parenting, because he's now kind of like, he's blaming the wife's parenting for the behavior of the children, and he's there sort of hitting them left, right, and center. So you have absolutely no kind of sympathy for him as a character whatsoever.
It seems like he's more like defending his turf, so to speak. Like whereas like in the original, we felt like the father was like kind of like you said, juggling with all these kind of things, like kind of the new home, the new family, the business, stuff like that. But here, that's kind of almost downplayed to the point where instead he's like struggling to like initially it's kind of seems like this kind of cute thing that like, oh, he's trying to he's playing with the one son and stuff like that, and like where, oh, you can call me whatever, George, and so they call him George and stuff like that, and then after a while though, what starts happening is that like he's like like trying to defend himself, kind of as, the man of the house and stuff. And then he's kind of like, like the wood chopping thing we talked about. It almost seems like he's like basically showing to this son, like kind of who's really, kind of the alpha and stuff like that. And I felt like that was more like kind of what was brought out and everything. And this is like kind of not even really talking about the Ryan Reynolds flexing, all over the place and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean it was kind of like this, and there's something kind of quite sort of, really distasteful about a grown man trying to be superior to a 9-year-old boy, being ultra sort of like, your place. It's kind of, there's something really kind of, it reeks of insecurity, but so there was quite a lot of more of that. I mean, I think as well, I felt like Melissa George didn't really have much to do in this, apart from just do, I mean, this kind of thing where when someone turns on your kids, there's a point where, and there's a lot of horror movies like this, where it's kind of familial, where the wife is kind of quite sort of understanding me, kind of going with it, and then she'll be, something real happens, you go, get away from my child. There's the kind of get away from my child sort of section in the movie. And you see that a hell of a lot in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Well, she I guess the main purpose that she served was the obligatory, run to the library and manage to find like, all the supernatural kind of links to what's happening and stuff like that. I tell you, these libraries are amazing. They may not have like anything about how to, like kind of garden, like kind of with organic soil stuff, but they'll have like, these supernatural, kind of secrets that will save the universe.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Like an entire history of the Salem witch trials from 1800s, readily on hand for anyone
with
to
diagrams.
Peruse. Yes, very handy diagrams too. And and again, like, I mean, the room wasn't red, which was kind of disappointing. But yeah, and he's got all the flashbacks of the various kind of things that were supposed to be happen, but was supposed to have happened, I should say. Yeah, I mean, it tried to kind of build to a climax, but it was so many like Oh, he's attacking the kids. Oh, he's found the room. Oh, they're under attack. Oh, he's going to hit them with an axe. Oh, she hit him with a gun. And it's just like, oh, it's over.
And again, major spoilers always, like, you know, they did the cheap thing of like showing him, you know, killing, you know, the wife and stuff like that. And, you know, like kind of as a way, like kind of go shock you a bit to kind of, and I feel like that's really what, you know, like kind of that nowadays we tend to replace kind of horror by building tension, kind of, you know, all that kind of stuff with just shocks. Lots of, like you said, lots of jump scares and lots of kind of shocking moments. That's to us what horror is now and stuff, versus like kind of, you know, the dread and then kind of building and kind of, you know, like the things that I feel like kind of, you know, as we'll be talking about with, you know, movies like The Shining and stuff like that, that like the things that kind of where it's the building, it's the kind of, and then the payoff that kind of really to me is like kind of what makes it horror and stuff, versus like, you know, just like, let's throw as many shocks and scares as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I found the situation of the babysitter getting trapped in the cupboard in the original, and just this kid who just wouldn't let her out, is far more kind of creepy than this whole thing with her sticking a finger in the bullet hole of the head of the girl and everything. It was just like, oh God, we really need all that. And then right at the end, you know, they had this weird kind of face flipping thing with the girl, and then she got, I mean, what was all that about? It didn't really make any sense. It was kind of like, oh, we're really supposed to believe she's the good ghost and the dad was the bad ghost, and it's like, you know, you're trying too hard here.
Yeah, and even like kind of the mythos, if you will, like kind of that, like there was apparently like something about Indians and something about like kind of a demonic priest and kind of I don't know, it was like kind of a weird kind of, you know, like when they, instead of like kind of like you said, this red chamber, right, that like kind of was the mouth of hell, whatever, it's like that, and where like kind of you only saw so much of that and everything, but instead you had this like kind of huge like dungeon like kind of that Ryan Reynolds is going down and stuff. And then like, you know, and meanwhile she's reading, of course, like we said in the library, this elaborate backstory explaining all this in the back, like where kind of it's alternating flashes to that, and it's like, what did it really get us?
No, they butchered Indians, and it was a bit like the Poltergeist 2 guy. They threw everything in there. Everything was in the dungeon. People got killed there, and so I mean, by that point, I'd really got really bored with this movie, to be honest with you, and I kind of switched off at that point. You know,
I just wanted Chloe Moretz to be safe. That was all. I just didn't want her to get killed after all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually one thing that I thought was really, really more effective in the original, was when they're actually leaving the house. Because, of course, the difference is in the original, you know, there's still some, you're just never going to believe that Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George are going to be a couple ever again after the remake, because he's there sort of being abusive and calling her all sorts of things and hitting her and whatnot. In the original, you know, he's much more kind of middle down the line. And you kind of feel like once he got out of the house, you think, oh, well, they'll be all right now. They got out of the house. They're going to be okay. But then, you know, the little girl's like, well, what about Harry? And he's going back for the dog. And you just think, oh, man, you know, just, it's not worth it. It's not worth it, you know. But, I mean, that's a really cool scene where he just falls through the stairs and he's just so... You know,
and it seemed like the dog was attacking him, thinking like he was some evil spirit or whatever. Yeah. But it turns out, like, you know, the dog was trying to save him. I thought that was like kind of like a last kind of little bit of surprise, you know, in that moment and stuff.
And I think it was quite visually impressive, the fact that he falls down into this. Again, they seem to have a random oil pit underneath their house somehow. But, you know, he comes out completely covered in this sort of black goo. And that's quite a kind of, it's quite an effective scene. And the fact that it's just him covered completely head to toe in weird black liquid was quite strange, really. And they would have done something more, obviously more over the top in a modern horror movie with it. But, but it was quite, because it really did play with your expectations. You thought, is that a monster? Is it him? Is that blood? Or what's going to happen now? But it's just weird black foil or something, and and he makes, you know, and you're quite happy when he makes out with the dog, you know. So
And
secret dungeons. So
yeah.
if you treat this like an episode of HGTV, always be careful. If you see a bargain, take a dog with you, get it to sniff out. Make sure there aren't any secret witch dungeons in the basement, that aren't up to code. And, just look for that, any kind of blood that might be underneath the wallpaper that might be just waiting to come out.
I gotta say that, like, beating the wife was like kind of bad enough like that, but killing a dog, I think that really crossed the line in the remake.
It was, yeah. I mean, you got absolutely no sympathy for him. He's hitting children, hitting women, killing dogs with axes. It's just like, God, just kill him with you, shoot him and let him go there, I mean, yeah, it's a good beard, and he's obviously been working out, but is it really worth it? I mean, okay, so let's the one critical question we haven't sort of faced in this comparison is who had the best beard, James Brolin or Ryan Reynolds? Ryan Reynolds is very sculpted, but I don't think it has the everyman kind of rough and tumble of the James Brolin beard.
Well, I'll tell you, for the Charles Manson look, James Brolin wins hands down.
Yeah, he does. You're right. You're absolutely right. He's definitely a much more convincing Charles Manson look, definitely. Yeah. And he looks iller as well as the movie goes on. Yes. He really does look very ill by the end of the movie. So, yeah. My goodness. I'm going to have to keep writing these down. So, yet another similarity with The Shining is there is a part where the husband, father, finds the wife, it's not the wife in The Shining, but there's a woman who he thinks is young and attractive, who then suddenly turns old through some sort of weird supernatural effect. So that's, again, a very, very similar scene to The Shining.
Right.
I'm writing all these down for when we do that. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on
No, I think we covered it really, kind of pretty much just drove it home and stuff like that. But I think also though, like, for our kind of Chloe Moretz season, so to speak.
Yeah.
This is like a great start to see, like, kind of, her kind of, talent starting to really shine and stuff.
Absolutely.
The next movie she actually makes apparently is Let Me In and everything like that. But right after that is Carrie, which we'll be talking about next and everything. So looking forward to kind of chatting about that. And I think we'll kind of wrap it up for this time. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds, and we will speak with you all again soon about the next remake versus the original.